Hi everyone, welcome back to the farm. Once again, I hope that you're doing well. And this week, a bit of time just to share a short encouragement with you. As always, at the end of a long day here on the farm, but praising the Lord for all that's being accomplished day by day here. Over these weeks, you've met many of the characters and seen a lot of the places here on the farm. Of course, there's many more for you to meet. I think I've told many of you we're often a zebra and a giraffe short of a zoo here, and that zoo often grows, and these past weeks it's grown again. We had neighbors who gave us a horse, and I'm still undecided whether that's a blessing or a curse. Animals have been a huge part of our family, namely for our kids, for them to learn responsibility, for our girls who love horses. They both have jobs and know the cost of caring for those animals, and they take care of feeding them. And we also help with animals that need a home. One of those horses is a rescue that only has one eye, but this latest edition was one that our neighbors had too many mouths to feed, and so they passed it along to our daughters. What makes this unique is that this horse named Sunny was not yet broken, and so if you came to our farm each day for about an hour, Anna and Mary are working with Sunny, and they're teaching him and breaking him, and in the process of learning to ride him. And so I think this week, after many weeks of hard work, they've finally been able to get on him for the first time. And just watching that process has led me to think of a few thoughts, and one of those thoughts comes from not only our study in the book of Exodus, but also what we spoke of last week. We talked of being thankful for the Moseses, the Paul, the Apollos in our life who's planted seeds and watered those seeds of God's word and God's will in our lives. And one of those people who was influential in my life, I mentioned last week as being a mentor whom I had the privilege of saying thank you to before he went home to be with the Lord. His name was Daryl, and he was a gentleman who owned horses. He had many horses, in fact over 100, and as a young man I would go out there and help him on his farm from time to time. And it was amazing to watch him grow in what he did, because Daryl, when we first met, was a guy who would tie his horses to a post with a rubber tube, and he would allow us to scare them, and those horses would try to buck and turn and run. And you can imagine the tire tube was soft, and so it wouldn't allow them to get hurt, but eventually they'd realize that they couldn't get away, but also that they didn't need to get away because the noise itself wouldn't hurt them. And so he would break them the old-fashioned way. He would, in a sense, desensitize them, ride them, buck them out, and he was very good at what he did. He was a rodeo roper and rode in many different categories. But what was amazing was to watch how he grew in the discipline of what he did. Years later, when I went back, he had changed, and he became what we now would call a horse whisperer. And when we went back, I asked him what changed and what he did now. And was fascinating was he brought us into a place in which he had a round pen created with corral panels. And he would start not by scaring them, not by chasing them, but simply by walking into this arena, and he would wait. And the moment the horse noticed he was there, he walked away and left. And the next day he would come in, and he'd walk in, and when the horse noticed him, he'd walk out. And he'd come in, and he'd go out. And he'd come in, and eventually the horse's natural curiosity would drive that horse at some point to wander over to him. And not only that, then, once he had the horse coming to him, he'd come in with a blanket, and then he'd leave. And then he'd come in with the blanket, and he'd leave. And then he'd bring that blanket and touch the horse with the blanket, and he'd leave. And then he'd put it on the back of the horse, and then he'd leave. And then he'd do the same with the saddle, and the same with the harness. And by the time he was finished, without ever bucking, without ever any sense of difficulty, he would get on that horse for the first time. And the horse was fully submissive, not because it had been broken to, but because it wanted to. He had built a relationship with that animal, one, so that it wanted to be in relationship to him as his master. And I love that picture. The picture of him standing at the fence, waiting for the animal to respond to him. And I wonder how many times the Lord speaks to us in like manner. It tells us in Exodus chapter 33 that God spoke to Moses as a man speaks to his friend. It was all the way back in Exodus and chapter 3 that we saw Moses pass by the burning bush. And it said, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire in the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight. It brings to mind when Samuel was called, and God spoke and said, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel woke up and went to Eli and said, here I am. And he said, I didn't call you, go back to bed. And again God called, and he went to Eli. And again God called, and then he realized, the next time God speaks, say, here I am, your servant is listening. And it was that moment that God spoke to Samuel for the first time. And I think how often we speak of God as this powerful God, omnipotent God, all-knowing God. And yet he's also a patient God who speaks, who calls our name, and who waits. And what a beautiful picture today that he longs for us to long for him and to be in a relationship with him. And because of my friend and that mentor in my life, that picture will never leave. And I hope today that it's a reminder to you, as it is to me, that today God's calling. And it may not be, perhaps, as monumental as a burning bush in Moses' life, or in the beginning of Samuel's call, who had become a great prophet and a turning point in his life. It may be in the quiet things. God may today be calling our name and looking and longing for us to turn to him. And he may be calling us, and it may have to do with something we're doing, and he wants our attention. He wants to turn our eyes, turn our gaze to him. He may be calling our name because he wants us to see something, to know something. And he's waiting that we might turn, see him, and open our ears and hearts to him. And so, as we always say, God is always speaking, but so often we are not listening. And I hope it's a reminder today, as simple as that as you go about your day, once again, you'd be listening for his still small voice, or those moments in which he's there waiting to gain your attention. And that he wants not just our songs, not just our prayers, not our religion, not our services or sermons, but a heartfelt relationship with a living God. And that's where life and true living really begins. Again, I hope that's an encouragement to you. God has been encouraging me in that very way. And as we've been looking in Exodus at a God who desires to speak personally to his people. And just as he spoke to Moses as a friend, he longs to call us friends. May he be speaking to you loudly and clearly, and may we all have ears wide open and hearts ready to receive what he has for us. I look forward once again to our time on Sunday, and I look forward to all that God is doing in our midst. And we'll see you soon. All for now from the farm. Take care. God bless. See you soon.